Okay, so you've probably seen the headlines a couple weeks ago. The CDC changed its website page on vaccines and autism, and honestly, the comments on my social media blew up. And here's the crazy part. Right when the news broke, I was literally in my car listening to the Huberman Lab podcast where Andrew Huberman interviewed Chris Palmer, a Harvard-trained psychiatrist, and something just clicked. Like, wait a second, this is about so much more than what people think. They were talking about autism, and I'm going to walk you through what they said. And I think it's going to make you see this whole conversation differently. Stick with me until the end because I'm going to ask the one question we should all be asking. And I will tell you how you can be an empowered parent or informed professional. All right, let's dive in. Hi, I'm Dr. Dana Johnson. I'm an occupational therapist with a PhD in child mental health and development, but I've also dove deep into functional and nutritional medicine because honestly, I kept seeing gaps in how we were helping our kids. For almost 20 years now, I've been working with families who have children with complex autism and whole body apraxia, and I have learned so much from each and every one of these families. Okay, so Huberman and Chris Palmer jump right into the vaccine question, but not the vaccine question. Instead, Huberman asks, do vaccines cause inflammation? Now, Chris answers by asking 3 questions to help connect the dots. Let's watch.
Is there any possibility that vaccines could contribute to that process? Do vaccines increase inflammation? I think the answer to that is yes. Is there variation in the inflammatory response between different people? I think the answer to that is yes. Can some people have a hyper-exaggerated inflammatory response in response to a vaccine? I think the answer to that is yes. In that condition, so in that rare, less common condition where somebody is having a hyper-exaggerated inflammatory response to a vaccination, could that impact neurodevelopment? The science right now says yes. We have no reason to think it wouldn't.
The science says it's possible. In people with existing inflammatory responses, vaccines could contribute to neurodevelopmental issues. Now, this is interesting because it's not what's being pushed out in the media, but this is biology and how our systems work, and that's a fact. Vaccines cause inflammation by design. That's how they create immunity. The question isn't, do they cause inflammation? Because they do. The real questions are how much inflammation in which individual and at what cost versus benefit. These are all important questions and ones that we need to consider for your family and for yourself. But first, let's go a bit deeper. Huberman asked Chris Palmer this question next. Can vaccines disrupt mitochondrial function? And could this be connected to autism?
Is there any evidence that vaccines or the adjuvants for vaccines or anything about vaccines and their delivery can disrupt mitochondrial function? You know, so often we think that it's like the vaccine having a specific effect on what the vaccine was designed to target that could potentially cause side effects or something like that. That's what many of the theories hold. But given the key role of mitochondria in all aspects of brain functioning, and given that some people are convinced, I'm not saying I believe this, but are convinced that vaccines are tied to these mental health challenges or to autism. Let's be direct about this. Is there any evidence that vaccines of any kind can disrupt mitochondrial function or support mitochondrial function for that matter?
Now, I have a video that talks all about mitochondria, what they are, and why we commonly see mitochondrial dysfunction in autism. So if you're wondering what the heck mitochondria are and why are they important, be sure to check that video out. Now, here's what Chris says, and pay attention to the very important word that he uses.
Is there any evidence that high levels of inflammation impair mitochondrial function? The answer to that is unequivocally yes. High levels of inflammatory cytokines like TNF-alpha, interleukin 6 and others impair mitochondrial function. We know that. It is clear and unequivocal.
Okay, so the word he uses here is unequivocal. Not maybe, not possibly, but unequivocal. So what does this mean? Well, when inflammation increases in the body, our cells or the mitochondria's ability to produce energy goes down. So for example, think about when you have the flu. You're exhausted, you can't think clearly, your motivation crashes, and you just want to stay in bed. Those are brain symptoms caused by inflammation. And this isn't a theory, it's what we see. It's measurable biology. So here's a question for you to think about. If temporary inflammation from the flu causes temporary brain dysfunction, what happens when inflammation is chronic or it hits during critical developmental windows, like pregnancy? Now, here's where it gets important. Chris says that we have decades of evidence that inflammation during pregnancy increases autism risk. Here's what he says.
We know that over the course of the last century, as there were kind of outbreaks of bacterial or viral infections in the population, we saw higher rates of neuropsychiatric, neurodevelopmental disorders in the offspring of the pregnant women. So we've long known that, and that evidence is pretty well established.
For instance, forgive me, but the one that I'm aware of is that flu in pregnant mothers at the first to second trimester transition is correlated with statistically higher incidence of schizophrenia in the offspring. Do I have that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
But then there was a rubella outbreak that resulted in much higher rates of autism in the offspring. I think that was in the 1960s. And now we have really decades of animal models. So they take mice and they inject them with lipopolysaccharide, which causes an inflammatory reaction. And when they do this to pregnant mice, the mice that are born to those women, those female mice, are at much higher risk for showing signs or symptoms of what looks like a neurodevelopmental disorder.
Now, I realize that we cannot 100% say that mice are exactly the same as humans. However, they are as close as we can get. And this is how a lot of science is done when the intervention is too risky for humans. It helps us make correlations and ask deeper questions. Now, this is where a lot of the autism research has been focused, understanding how inflammation during pregnancy impacts brain development. So if we know inflammation during pregnancy increases autism risk, why aren't we talking about all the sources of inflammation? Things like obesity, infections, environmental toxins, chronic stress, poor diet, and yes, vaccines. Next, Chris talks about a federal court case that proves the mechanism that he just discussed. This is huge because it brings up a concept that I refer to when working with my clients, and that is total load theory. My friend Beth Lambert from Documenting Hope and Patricia Lemur, the author of Total Load Theory, discuss this in much more depth. I will link information to both in the description. Now, let's listen to Chris.
There's one case of a young child who already had an existing mitochondrial disorder. It was already known. She got vaccines, and I think within days or weeks of getting the vaccinations, she developed profound neurodevelopmental symptoms. That case won a lawsuit. It went to court, it was tried in court, and she won. And the court ruled that the vaccine did, in fact, contribute to this girl's neurodevelopmental condition. Now, they assumed it was because she had a pre-existing mitochondrial disorder. And I would support that. It lines up perfectly with what I've been talking about all along, that people who have vulnerabilities with mitochondria or metabolism, you can only absorb so many hits. And when you get that final hit that tips kind of the balance to impact neurodevelopment, you can get that.
Now, here's how total load theory works. Some kids have pre-existing vulnerabilities like metabolic dysfunction or genetic issues or even immune issues. They encounter an inflammatory trigger like an infection, vaccines, toxins, or even excess chronic stress. And eventually they hit a threshold. And as a result, neurodevelopmental regression occurs. And this is what so many parents that I work with describe. Their child was born typical, but regressed at a certain age. So these critical questions now come to my mind. Did these children have metabolic vulnerabilities? And how would the parents even know? Are the doctors even checking? Now, I feel that this is the most important part of the discussion. Nobody is talking about this, at least in the autism world, but it should make everyone pause and think.
So we know that like women with obesity, much more likely, twice as likely to have an autistic child.
Is that right?
Yeah. Meta-analysis, over 3 million people. Women with obesity have double the risk of having an autistic child. Have rates of obesity been skyrocketing in our population? The answer is yes. Are pregnant women also in that camp of obese women? Yes. Well, that accounts for a doubling of autism. Same deal with diabetes. Women who have diabetes, twice as likely to have autistic children as women who don't have diabetes. When you put the two together, obese and diabetic, quadruple the rate of autism in the offspring.
What about dad? You know, there are these theories about the statistically significant increases in rates of autism for offspring of men who are 50 or older. My read of the data is that it's still a very small increase. It's not like the kind of increases you're describing here for diabetes.
It is. So men with obesity, twice as likely to have an autistic child as men who are not obese.
Yeah, which is something like 25 times greater than the increase due to age of the male. So this is so important because people hear, older sperm equals higher probability of autism, but yes, still a very low probability of autism compared to dad is obese, but in his 20s or 30s.
Yes.
So why does obesity increase autism risk then? Well, here's the biological mechanism that most people miss. Obesity equals chronic inflammation. And excess body fat, especially belly fat, isn't just stored energy. It's actively pumping out inflammatory molecules 24/7. And these are the exact same inflammatory molecules that cross the placenta during pregnancy, affect fetal brain development, and then increase the autism risk. And so this explains why the obese mothers have 2 times the autism risk, diabetic mothers have 2 times the autism risk, and obese and diabetic mothers have 4 times the autism risk. It's the inflammation. Metabolic dysfunction creates a chronically inflamed internal environment, and that inflammation is affecting the developing baby. When a child is already dealing with chronic inflammation from metabolic issues, and then they encounter additional inflammatory triggers like high stress, environmental toxins, an infection, or a vaccine, their body can't handle it. They're already at their inflammatory threshold. One more hit and they tip over into neurological damage. This is why that court case matters. The girl with pre-existing mitochondrial disorder was already vulnerable. The vaccine was the final inflammatory trigger that tipped the balance. But here's the question we need to ask. How many children have undiagnosed metabolic vulnerabilities due to parental metabolic dysfunction? And how many are one inflammatory trigger away from regression? Now, here's the startling reality and something we should all be paying attention to. Let's listen.
Only 7% of Americans are healthy in all 5 biomarkers.
Yikes.
Only 7%. Poor metabolic health influences neurodevelopment in offspring. We know that. So we see skyrocketing rates of autism. It's not just autism. We see skyrocketing rates of ADHD as well, simultaneously. And everybody's scratching their heads trying to figure out, where's all this autism coming from? Where's all this ADHD coming from? Well, look around, people. As the metabolic health of the United States population declines, we are going to see more neurodevelopmental disorders.
So what is the question that we should be asking? Why are we looking at one cause when 93% of Americans are metabolically unhealthy? They have metabolic dysfunction, which is causing chronic inflammation, and that inflammation has a massive impact on autism risk. And what about those who already have a diagnosis of autism? How much does metabolic health have to do with their ability to engage, communicate, and move? In my experience, a lot. The conversation shouldn't just be about vaccines. It should be about inflammation, all sources of it, and how can we reduce the total inflammatory load on our children. So what can you do as an empowered parent? You can optimize your child's health. And first, prioritize sleep. Now, I know that sleep is really challenging for some of my clients, but sleep deprivation increases inflammation. We want to optimize their nutrition, so reduce the inflammatory foods like processed foods and sugar. We want to address their metabolic health. We want to make sure that they maintain a healthy body weight. We want to reduce the toxic exposures, including environmental toxins, because they too can increase inflammation. And finally, exercise. Exercise is one of the best things that you can do to detoxify your body. Now, all of this can be very overwhelming. It's important, though, to take it one step at a time. Choose one of these to optimize rather than trying to tackle all of them at once. And remember, though, that this just isn't for your child. It's actually great for your entire family. Now, what if your child shows regression? Don't just accept a diagnosis and stop there. Demand a full workout. Check for vitamin and nutrient deficiencies. Look at central B12 deficiency, autoimmune markers, mitochondrial function tests. Look at inflammatory markers. And consider interventions like the ketogenic diet. It's used successfully for epilepsy, so why not neurodevelopmental conditions? Look at metabolic support and anti-inflammatory protocols. Address all of the contributing factors. Now, I'm going to link a few resources where you can go to find doctors who specialize in metabolic and functional health for your child and family. Now, I love what Chris says here. It's a longer clip, but I want to play it in full because he isn't afraid to say what needs to be said. Now, let's listen.
And especially with AI now, we can do this. This is a solvable puzzle. It is a complex puzzle, no doubt. But it is a solvable puzzle, and we should start to solve it. But right now, the state of the field is that we assign a label autism, and we tell the parents to just prepare for a disabled child. Just prepare yourself to take care of a disabled child for life. We're really sorry. We don't have anything more to offer. We can do some ABA training. We can do some basic, we'll try to teach them some social skills. The real outcome data on that is pretty bad. If your brain's not working right, it's hard to teach people how to do the skills that the brain is designed to do. And that's the challenge, is that it's all well and good to recognize a problem, but now we need to come up with effective treatments. And we know that a lot of the, people talk about early intervention with autism as though early intervention is going to save the day. I don't mean to bash the people doing that work. Let's do anything we can. It might help a little, but when you look at the outcome data, it's not helping much. And when you look at the statistics of the prevalence of autism, it's going through the roof. So those strategies are just not working. They're not working for prevention. They're not working to improve long-term outcomes. We have a lot of work to do. So
Yes, we have a lot of work to do. Metabolic health has to be something that everyone working in the field of autism is well educated on. This isn't just about one contributing factor. This is about the total load that is being placed on the child's developing neurological system. So let's start asking ourselves these questions. Why aren't we focused on metabolic health for our kids? Why aren't we looking at the total load theory? Why aren't doctors screening for mitochondrial and metabolic vulnerability? disabilities before vaccination? Why do we accept it's just autism instead of investigating treatable underlying causes like inflammation and metabolic dysfunction? Why isn't every prospective parent told, get metabolically healthy before conception? Your inflammatory state will affect your child's brain development. This is about understanding that autism is a complex metabolic and inflammatory condition with multiple contributing factors. But the empowering part is that you, as a parent, have more control than you think. Your child's metabolic health, inflammatory status, and mitochondrial function are things you can influence. Start asking your doctor or pediatrician more questions. Start demanding better answers. Your child deserves investigation, intervention, and hope. If this video helped you think differently or prompted questions you hadn't actually thought about, let me know in the comments. Let's keep this conversation going. And please share it with other parents and professionals who need this information. And remember, you're not crazy for asking questions. You're a parent doing your job. Thank you, and I will see you on the next video.